How did Hitler consolidate his power in Nazi Germany? First of all, what does the word consolidate actually mean? It means to secure something or make something safe, and that's exactly what Hitler needed to do after he'd been appointed Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January 1933 by President Hindenburg. The first event we're going to look at was hugely significant, hugely important for Hitler, and it came at exactly the right time, and that was the Reichstag fire, when the German Parliament building, situated in Berlin, called the Reichstag, set alight and set ablaze and was very, very badly damaged. A Dutch communist was found in the Reichstag with a box of matches, and his name was Marinus van der Lubbe. So he wasn't German, and he was a communist. And you have to put that into the context of the time, when communism was seen as a great threat to Germany. A communist had actually been discovered here, and the Reichstag was on fire, and immediately the reaction is terrorism. It's a terrorist plot by the communists to actually take over Germany, and of course Hitler builds on that feeling, and he makes the German people embrace that feeling of fear, and he builds on that feeling of fear, and he says, listen, if we don't deal with this problem of the communists effectively, then all of Germany is under threat. It allowed Hitler also to put pressure on President Hindenburg to give him more power to deal with this, in inverted commas, terrorist threat of the communists. And one thing that Hitler, of course, wanted to do was arrest as many communists as he could, in other words, to diminish their threat. Because you have to remember, in the elections of 1932, the communists did extremely well, so they were still a threat. Hindenburg responds by passing the emergency decree through the Reichstag, and he basically gave Hitler emergency powers, and Hitler immediately used those powers to arrest large numbers of communists and other political opponents. And Hindenburg basically caved in to public pressure to do that. It was a terrorist act, the Reichstag fire. Hindenburg responded as I suppose, in a way, he puts his trust in Hitler, and of course Hitler uses that trust to arrest and persecute communists. Leading on from that, on the 23rd of March, Hitler then puts through an act through the Reichstag called the Enabling Act. It's obviously a temporary Reichstag at this point, quite similar to what you're seeing in the picture, but it was actually a temporary building that was set up as the German Parliament because the fire had badly damaged the Reichstag itself. Hitler puts through the Enabling Law, and the Enabling Law will basically legalise his dictatorship and legalise the power that Hitler has. And it allowed Hitler to pass any law he wanted without parliamentary approval. It legalised his dictatorship. And it would mean that he wouldn't have to hold any elections. It meant essentially he could do anything he wanted without having to get votes from other politicians in the parliament. He could make decisions and push them through. Much later, the following year, an event called the Night of the Long Knives occurred. This was a purge. It was a blood purge by Hitler and the Nazis of leading members of the SA. And if you remember, the SA was Hitler's private army. From the 1920s, from the early 1920s onwards, it was led by a gentleman called Ernst Röhm. Ernst Röhm was the leader of this organisation. It had grown incredibly powerful. It had 170,000 members by 1932. It was a real rival to the German army, because if you remember, the German army has been restricted to 100,000 in terms of numbers because of the Treaty of Versailles. The purge took place on the 30th of June. It lasted for 2 days. Ernst Röhm was arrested. Up to 2,000 people were killed, most of them leaders of the SA, but also just political opponents of Hitler who he wanted to get rid of. What this actually did is it secured the support of the German army, who've been asking Hitler for 9-10 months to actually get rid of the SA, so that the army was restored to its prime position in Germany. The SA was a threat to the army based on the amount of members it had, based on the fact it was associated very closely with Hitler and the Nazis. The army wanted rid. Hitler knew and understood that he needed a strong German, professional German army to wage the kind of wars that he wanted to wage. So he made that decision. He got rid of them. On the 2nd of August 1934, Hindenburg died, and this helped Hitler even further. Hindenburg was someone who did not like Hitler. He described him as the silly bohemian corporal publicly. He had very little time for him, and of course his anti-Semitic views. He put a lot of pressure on Hindenburg. Hindenburg was aging anyway at the age of 83, and he died of old age. How did this help Hitler? It allowed him to combine the role of president and chancellor into one, and after this point he was known as the Fuhrer, the leader of Germany. What you could do now is perhaps just pause this video, copy out this table, and see if you can fill it in, just adding any detail you can. And of course, down here on the left hand side there is one other factor, which is that Hitler during this time set up the Gestapo, which was the secret police in Germany, which were also a very important organisation. So it might be that you try and find out more about that organisation as well.